Okay, you can't have a conversation about like-kind exchanges without understanding something called boot. Boot is it's additional property that changes hand in a like-kind exchange to make it a fair exchange, basically. For two parties to exchange property, that the perceived fair market value has to be equal in the total property exchanged. So when two parties exchange a certain asset, a certain type of asset, it's pretty unlikely that the fair market value of each asset is going to be identical. So one party usually has to kick in some additional property or cash to make the situation fair. And this extra non-like-kind property is called boot. So when boot is involved in a like-kind exchange, it changes the answer on how much gain is recognized by the taxpayer receiving boot. And these examples right here go through what amount is recognized. Basically, they give you an example, like in this case right here, where you first can calculate realized gain from a taxpayer exchanging property with another taxpayer, and then you figure out how much gain is recognized. So the general rule is the lesser of the gain amount or the boot received is recognized as gain, and the rest of the gain, if there is any, is deferred under the typical like-kind exchange rules. And only in boot only affects recognition of gain. So when losses are present, the receipt of boot doesn't trigger any gain. And also, the party that gives boot, so sometimes they can recognize. It's kind of like they're selling those other assets, those other boot assets. So if there's inherent gain or loss inherent in those assets, then that gain or loss will get recognized. But otherwise, the boot won't cause gain recognition on the part of the giver of boot. So this is a complicated topic, I know, but if you read through the explanation of boot and look through these three examples or four examples, I hope you'll get an understanding of what boot is and the effect that it has on gain recognition. As always, you can copy any of these into a discussion post and ask me questions about things you don't understand. Going down further, there's a big example talking about. I'll get to it in a second. Talking about like-kind exchanges. The next thing that you have to handle once you figure out how much of gain or loss is recognized in a like-kind exchange and how much is deferred, you also have to figure out the basis of the new property received by each party. Okay, and the code gives you kind of a complicated explanation of how to calculate that new basis in the asset received. But there's an easier way than this to calculate the new basis, and that is, and it might say it in here somewhere. I think it probably does because it says it in the PowerPoint slides by the publisher. But the easiest way to get basis in the property received is to take the fair market value of the new property received and then simply subtract any deferred gain that taxpayer has from the like-kind exchange, or add any deferred loss from the like-kind exchange. Okay, so depending on whether you've got gain or loss deferred, you add the deferred loss or subtract the deferred gain. So you'll see in this big example right here, when you get down to how to calculate the basis of the new property, they go through this bigger convoluted calculation to get the basis in the new property. I think you should look at what I just explained. It makes it a whole lot easier. But in this example, there are two taxpayers exchanging some property here. The first thing you always do is calculate the realized gain for each party. How much is the gain? That's the first step. It's like you're selling assets and you're getting something for those assets. So calculate the gain, then you look at how much is recognized. It's usually to the extent of the boot received, and then how much is deferred. After you know that, you can figure out the basis of the new property, and that's going to be it for the chapter.